a esta 15ª edición de la Manzana Prohibida, justo cerrando la COP20 acá en Lima. Tenemos un invitado bastante especial. Vamos a hablar sobre el cambio climático y los tal vez posibles acuerdos que se puedan llegar en el futuro para mitigar este problema, ¿no? En esta ocasión estamos con Nicolás Beriot. Él es secretario general del Observatorio Nacional sobre los Efectos Climáticos de Francia. Él ha venido acá especialmente para la COP20 para ver si llegan a unos acuerdos sobre el tema. Vamos a tener que pasar al inglés. Hello, Nicolás, how are you doing? Thank you for coming to our program.
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Well, I was wondering if you could explain a bit all this evidence that supports climate change, according to your view.
Mm-hmm. Well, the evidence is, when it goes, first of all, about climate, the climate itself, so what has been observed is the increase of temperature, so the average temperature of the Earth is very much observed and since a very long time, and the increase of average temperature was 0.7, 0.8 degrees during the last century. So this is not a small amount, because something that has to be known is that between two interglacial and glacial periods, the difference of average temperature of the Earth is not much more than 5 or 6 degrees, you know. So 1 degree is very much for the Earth as a difference. So increase of the temperature. We observe also a change in the glaciers, so glaciers are melting. The surface of the Arctic ice in summer has very much decreased. This is very much observed. There are some changes in precipitation patterns. The sea level height is changing by about 3 millimeters per year. The sea level is rising up due to two causes: the melting of glaciers, for example, but also the fact that the sea temperature also increases, and the volume increases also. That contributes both to the sea level height.
Yeah, that's something that happens also in Peru. Our glaciers are also retreating, no? Why the glaciers matter so much, no? What is the impact to citizens, like current citizens? How their life will be affected with this climate change?
Today, in the world, so already many impacts are observed, and the change in precipitation patterns has a strong effect in a number of countries. Potentially, the potential changes are very high. What we have to know is that there is an inertia in the climate system, so that even if we would stop now the causes of climate change, some climate change would still exist in the coming century because of this inertia of the system. Right now, we have changed the climate system, and the climate system is in a transition. To reach a stabilization of a climate system will, in any case, will take several tens of years.
Even if we stop emitting greenhouse gases today, the domino effect will continue, and it will be inevitable. No? But maybe if we kind of tomorrow stop emitting these gases, maybe the effect will not be as drastic as it would be if we continue.
The kind of scenarios that we have for the coming century are in almost all cases that we have studied now. There is, in any case, an increase of temperature. The most favorable scenario we try to make real is a scenario where the increase of temperature between the pre-industrial era and the end of this century, so in 90 years from now, would be less than 2 degrees or possibly 1.5 degrees. So these are the most favorable scenarios. Then the less favorable scenarios lead us to an increase of temperature between the pre-industrial era and the end of this century of the order of 3 or 4 degrees, which is very much.
So it's important to continue these efforts of zero emissions, not because we can avoid climate change. Climate change is inevitable, but the effects will not be as drastic. No, if we stop now, there's still time to mitigate this situation.
Absolutely, yes. A part of the climate change is inevitable. It's already here. It's already there, and we can see a number of impacts. But a large part is evitable, in fact. So in front of climate change, the climate policies include adaptation and mitigation. So what does it mean? So adaptation to climate change means that we have to live with this inevitable part of the climate change. So we have to take it into account and to modify slightly some activities. It can be, for example, in the way we handle water resources, or the way we deal with coastal zone management, taking into account the sea level rise, or the way we manage agriculture, perhaps changing some crops. The way also we build our houses. If the temperature is higher, then the norms, the standards will have to change when it goes about comfort of the building, etc., etc. So there are a number of actions in, I would say, many domains that can be taken for this adaptation to climate change. So there has to be, in each country, there has to be a plan of adaptation to climate change, because this phenomena is going to be in front of us for several tens of years. That's adaptation. Now, mitigation. Mitigation is something different. Mitigation is treating the causes of climate change. So the main causes of climate change are the increase of greenhouse gas emissions. So mitigation policies are these policies that reduce the causes. So, for example, increase of energy efficiency. So the way because the energy sector today is the sector that produces the largest part of the emission of greenhouse gases. So if we increase the way we use the energy, so if we increase the energy efficiency, it's positive. Of course, we can also go to renewable energies. We also have to reduce the emission of other gas like methane. The transport sector is also a sector that is producing quite much greenhouse gas emissions. So we will have to find new technologies or new ways of transport or new habits. And also, more generally, the way of life has to, in some aspects, to change. If we take the example of waste management, so we know that if we reduce the amount of waste, we will also reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases. So what we see is that, in fact, mitigation policies are not something that is completely separated from other policies, I would say, related to an ecological transition. And
so these policies rely on the application of technology, green technology, and also the citizens need to change their way of life. They need to start using more bicycles instead of cars, if they can, no? Or using energy-saving bulbs and that sort of things. No? But what about the most Americans, maybe, or some other nations, that they don't want to change. They don't want to lose comfort, no, for climate change. No? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean that we have to take, I would say, everything in a positive way. What we have learned is that the kind of development we have invented in the 20th century, well, has many, many positive outputs, of course, but it has some disadvantages, and we have to manage this now. So what we see is that in many cases there are co-benefits in these climate policies and in this change. The fact that we use less cars and maybe more bicycle, or that we walk a little bit, I mean, is an evident co-benefit from the point of view of health, for example. There are also co-benefits that are related to the pollution, so the fight against air pollution can be a co-benefit of some aspect of the climate policies. So also we have great opportunities to go to new technologies. There's a large field of innovation, so there is another economy that is possible. We talk more and more about circular economy, because circular economy is an economy where there is eco-design, eco-conception of products and services. So before at the same time we will design this product or this service, we'll try to envisage all consequences on natural resources, but also on air quality and also on greenhouse gas emission, for example. So this is looking at things on a much richer way than maybe we've been doing in the last 50 years, I would say. Circular economy is also envisaging a complete recycling of products, so less use of metals, less use of natural resources. So we'll recycle more and more, up to the point where maybe we'll be able to recycle 100% of a number of products. So these changes can be envisaged in an entirely positive manner. And I would like to add also something else. The fact that, you know, in the last 50 years, for example, we had many good surprises from the scientific point of view or from the technological point of view. So, I mean, we didn't have internet, we didn't have microcomputers, we didn't have the DNA analysis. So things like this, we didn't know at all 50 years ago that we would reach this, that it would even exist. So, I mean, good surprises are possible in the coming tens of years. But what we have to do is maybe to look at things differently and try to re-engineer a number of aspects of our life. What we can also do is very much think about biomimicry, because nature has a lot to teach to us. Looking at nature can give many ideas for technological innovations, but good innovations. So I see all this as very positive, and I'm very confident in the future.
Nicolás, if you can explain us the objective of COP20, why it's so important?
Well, in 1992, the United Nations has decided to have a framework convention on climate change. So, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And since 1992, so then the nations meet to avoid the dangerous effects of climate change. So this is a political negotiation. It was decided so in 1992 for which reason? Because the science had given strong signals on the reality of climate change that started to be observed, and the information from scientists was that this would continue and could become dangerous. So the signal came in particular from the IPCC, the Intergubernamental Panel of Experts on Climate Change.
You could explain us a bit what is the objective of this organization?
Yes, the Intergubernamental Panel of Experts on Climate Change was created at the end of the 80s in order to have an international body of experts who would produce scientific assessment, and so that the United Nations could have a reference, a basis, as a common and agreed scientific reference.
So they gathered the best scientists, experts on the subject, and so they could give their sound opinion. And the agreement was that it's impossible to deny it. We are indirectly modifying the climate in a way.
Yes, the experts that belong to the IPCC are experts that are proposed by the governments, and the report, the fifth report that was produced recently, involved more than 800 scientists from I think more than 100 countries, so that in fact there is this trust that can be given by the governments to the results of this international expertise. So the IPCC is organized in 3 working groups. The first working group is working on, I would say, the climate physics. The second working group is working on the impacts of climate change, the vulnerabilities to climate change, and the adaptation to climate change. And the third working group is working on the mitigation issues, so how to fight against the causes of climate change, what can be the technologies, what can be the economic trajectories, and so on.
You have to talk to scientists, and then you have to deliver the science to politicians and try to convince them.
United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was created in 1992, so it's the creation of this convention shows that the countries were decided to work on it. So since then, there is unanimity of countries to accept the conclusion of the IPCC and to work on a political level to fight against the causes of climate change and to adapt to climate change.
So what would be the next step? Because no treaty, no agreement has been yet signed. What are the expectations for the next meeting?
Right now, we had the COP20 in Lima, and Peru was president of this COP and will remain president along the next year. And at the end of next year, from the 30th of November to the 11th of December, the COP21 will be held in Paris. So on the 30th of November 2015, France will become president of the COP. So it means that along the next year, Peru and France will be in frequent contact.
Are you positive about these possible agreements in the future? And what do a good agreement would be? Maybe zero emissions in 10 years? What do you think?
What I can say objectively is that today the international community has understood that the climate policies are part of, I would say, broader policies that are related to some kind of ecological transition. So the climate policies have to be considered in a broader perspective of policies that will help the world to go to more sustainable ways of development. We have clearly understood is that the states and the governments have a number of responsibilities, and of course they are discussing, negotiating, expressing commitments. But the other components of the society are also very active and very involved, and more and more. So I mean that the private sector the, the, the investors, financial investors, the individuals, the NGOs, and the local communities, the cities, the regions. So in these various sectors of the society, many initiatives are taken. A lot of information, a lot of knowledge circulates, among these various groups. So, this is quite independent of the states, and many initiatives are taken. So what we really observe since a few years, and maybe I would say particularly since Rio+20 in 2012, is there is this very wide mobilization of many groups and many people, many components of the civil society worldwide to contribute to this climate policies at their level.
I was just thinking about the process that Europe went through after the Second World War. You have the United Nations that they got together to avoid having another war, and they pretty much succeeded. I mean, there's the chances of Europe having a war between the other countries is low. Maybe this climate change is the excuse we need to have a global economy, a global nation, or try at least to make all the countries work in one problem, and that could lead to very big things. What do you think?
My background is meteorology, so I worked as a meteorologist, and in fact, meteorology is about a fluid that is the atmosphere, very much about this fluid that is the atmosphere, and this fluid is common to the planet, and we breathe the same air, okay, and we share this same air. So this is straightforward what I'm saying, but when you look at history, you can see that meteorology is a sector where international cooperation has started very early, in the middle of the 19th century. In fact, there were two areas where some kind of world cooperation has started in the 19th century, and one of them was the telegraph, for evident reasons of compatibility of signals and so on, but the other one was meteorology. So it's true that doing meteorology and working on climate, this is working on these fluids that are the atmosphere and that are the ocean in particular, and that we share. So in fact, humanity is facing a common issue, and as you say, this is a good place, a good opportunity for us to realize that we share many commons and one planet, and we have only one.
Molecules do not have passports. They go from one place to another. They cross borders. The atmosphere is one system. You cannot split it in different parts. Just one last question. What do you think about the future of humanity? Do you think that is there still hope to turn around climate and having a future with no contamination and stable climate, maybe?
What I see is fantastic, I would say, mobilization, and the fact that the level of skills, the level of knowledge of many actors is increasing so much, so that I would say that all of us will become more clever, in the sense that we see more and more the connections that each of us has with the natural environment. We better understand the connection of each our human activity with natural resources and climate system and a biosphere, and we become able to share what I observe week after week or day after day, in particular since 1 or 2 years. What I observe is a very high number of connections that exist between various groups around these topics. So as I very much involved in international things and meeting many people all year long, I can say that I see this I see this movement, I see this connection, and I think that the mobilization is at its best today. I'm a scientist. I consider that there is, I would say, no limit to innovation. We have to continue research, fundamental research, applied research in many areas. And I mean, all is on the table for us to solve the issues. So
maybe there's a way to extract or to convert the CO2 of the atmosphere in the future. No? Maybe technology could stop this cataclysm. Thank you very much for coming, Nicolás. It was a pleasure to have you here in La Manzana. We were talking about climate change and the perspective of these international negotiations, and hopefully we could mitigate, not maybe stop, but mitigate the effects of climate change. My name is Victor Garcia Belaunde. This was another edition of La Manzana Prohibida, and hope to see you next time.